I think it would have been in the late 70s. Ralph and I were keeping time together, and we had his bookstore, that he and Kathy's bookstore that I would visit, and we decided that the meal program would start. One of the persons that we sought out was John Keyes. John had been sort of my sixth grade spelling teacher by default, and so he was somebody that people knew all over the East Side. Even if they didn't know about the port, they knew about John. John was a person that they considered to be the mayor of the East Side, mayor of Atwood Avenue for sure. And so it made sense to talk to John about the people we were encountering on or around the street. And also when we started the meal program, John was one of the people that we would check in with. But John was a visitor, and so we would go over and visit with John and hang out with John a little bit here and there, see him around, and so that was certainly that part of the St. Vincent de Paul. And the store was just up the street, and it's hard to remember that back in those days that was the only store. So it wasn't like, oh, I touched base with the St. Vincent de Paul over on Odana Road or in Wanakee or whatever. The St. Vincent de Paul was all within, even though it reached out into the community of people that were in need, it was all within one block. My memory was that I was looking for a gift for my nephew's first communion, and I checked with Bishop Wirtz. George Wirtz was an old family friend, and I asked him, where would you go to get a gift appropriate for a first communion? And he had this green card that had all Ralph and Kathy's bookstore information on it, and he sent me up to the Christian Book Center. It was at 437 West Gorham Street. It was where Gorham Street ended, Bassett Street went off to the left, and University Avenue went off to the right, and it was on the second floor of the open pantry grocery store. So George had sent me down there, and I went down there and walked up the stairs, and it was whether Ralph and Kathy had an impeccable taste in terms of display in that bookstore. It was different than most faith-based, religious-based, religious goods stores, and it was also, it was a bookstore too, than you would see around. Most of the time you were used to holy cards and lots of rosaries hanging here and there, but they just had it displayed in a different way. So I went up to visit and looked for that gift, and then say a half a week later or whatever, also went back and just would go back there and to browse and whatever else. And Ralph and I struck up a friendship. We're the same age, and of course it had to do with cinnamon rolls and coffee, and so we became fast friends. That was, going on 50 years ago.
That's so great.
Ralph and I started the meal program together, and I was the director for 40 years, and we were connected in a lot of different ways. There was a synergy there that, we actually needed each other between the port and the St. Vincent de Paul and the meal program. In a cynical sort of way, we needed some place to be able to move food on that you could trust, and the port was certainly that, but also the food pantry. Things like milk and whatever else, because the meal program isn't one of those things that operates on an exact amount. It's about, the meal program's about organizing a community of people to live out their faith by being able to share the food that they have. So the question about how much you need isn't just one of those things. It really is, does this make sense for you, and do you want to be involved? And we had to have the reputation, and I wanted to have the reputation of treating people's food donation with some respect and some dignity, and we could work together with the St. Vincent de Paul to make that happen. And they did the same thing back. I mean, if they got something that they weren't going to be able to use, but they knew would be right for us, we traded things back and forth. Also, I mean, John, I had that long history with John Keyes. He died in February 12th of 1983. And Ralph and I and Peggy Weber were there because not when John died, but because he died, the port was in real jeopardy of imploding. It didn't know, first of all, they had never paid a director. So they didn't exactly know how to go forward without John. John was there as a founder, and he was there for 7 or 9 years. And so knowing John and liking the port and knowing the St. Vincent de Paul and all those things really spurred us on to say, you know, it's important to get involved in this. And it wasn't like, oh, you know, this is, you know, I'm counting my time. It is a matter that you belong. You know, so many times saying, well, am I going to do this for this year? I say, well, of course I'll do it longer than that. I mean, that's not even a question either, because it's someplace where we belong and we're together. And so just trying to help at the port, you know, stabilize that whole thing. John and Kathy's son, John, was named after John Keyes. That's how important the whole thing was to them, you know, and it was to me too. I mean, John was a very interesting person, but you know, the Dick Pilsners of the world and the Mike Nuns and Elizabeth Irby and all those people that were sort of part of the leadership at that time. They were all volunteers, you know, they were all just very extremely committed people. They used to all I mean, besides her and Shelley being John's sisters, I mean, they, you know, they all used to make lunch over there, and, you know, Peggy Weber was with a group of people from St. Pat's and Cottage Grove that they nicknamed the Good Sisters from the Grove, that all had some very committed relationship with the port and the store, but there wasn't as much to do with the store. I mean, some volunteers, Ed Grady and others, would spend a lot of time processing things down in the old seed building. But unless you were really on the inside, you know, you never saw how that was all going. They were down there, you know, the whole rag industry and cardboard industry for recycling was big even way back then. But those guys worked tirelessly to do that stuff. But the meal program was all about building community, and I think this, to me, the St. Vincent de Paul is too. It's not just about, let's see how many of this or that we can do, how many food pantries we can do, how many vouchers we can do. All that stuff is important, but in the whole fabric of this is about being part of this community and understanding each other a little differently. You know, I think in my own life, It's because of some of the things that I've realized that other people have taught me by the fact that they've been our customers. That if you lose track of that, and that things like the meal program or things like the port or things like the food pantry are not necessarily easy places to come to, as easy as you try to make it, and try to break down some of those barriers and fences. In the end of the day, there's still a price to it all. I tell the story, and I remember one night I was outside the meal program, and it was about this time of year and this kind of weather, kind of damp and kind of dreary, but dark in the evening, and I was outside the building, and I heard somebody down towards the end of the building. There's a garage that has a little indent, and I went down there. I heard somebody down there, and I started walking closer to see if I could figure out. And I heard somebody that sounded like they were in distress. It sounded like they were crying, and I got closer, and I heard a woman say, "I never thought I'd have to do that in my whole entire life." And she'd just been in to eat with us. And so it's for me, it's really good to remember that whole aspect of community building. Oh, there's been so many. Certainly the moment that John left us will be something that's never forgotten. And I even remember the date. But there's been so many other joyful things. I remember when the St. Vincent de Paul was able to build the addition on the Willie Street store, and that became the processing center. That was like, oh my goodness, we have arrived now. There's been so many moments of arrival. A stove at the port was like, oh, can we go? We can't go any farther up from here. But just as the St. Vincent de Paul has expanded, I remember when Ralph became the store manager and what that developed into, and things like when the processing center burned, and you wondered whether this was going to be it. When they built this building, when that opened, that was, as my mother would have said, let's write it on the calendar. There have been plenty of write it on the calendar moments, and you can tell in the feeling of it all that there's just more to come. That it isn't, we haven't just gotten just there. That there's more of a future, and one of the really important things about this organization is that it isn't stagnant. It's growing and learning and considering a better way to do it, not just for efficiency, but to keep in mind the delivery system for the people that need the services here and would like to access them, as well as what it does for this community. It's not a stand on your laurels kind of organization. Well, it's the people. It's the other folks that are facing it along the way too. I don't know that over time. I guess I go back almost 50 years with the St. Vincent de Paul, And I don't know that I don't know how much I've actually really done, but I know that whatever has been done with a lot of people. And you know, and we were mentioning them earlier. I mean, just all the people on the staff here, but all the volunteers. There are I don't know what the first volunteer appreciation dinner was, how many people were there, but how many were at the last one? I mean, I would probably think a couple of 200-300 probably.
Yeah, I think 280.
Yeah. So it you know, that those are all people that hold on to the vision, hold on to the philosophy, agree with it, buy in, and that's what makes an organization. So, I mean, I don't know if there's as much about perseverance as there is much about the joy of being able to be taken along with the flow, and say this is something that makes sense, both from a faith perspective and a societal, community, neighborly perspective, and that it's something you belong to. You know, it's not something you just do. The guy, I think of it all the time, a good friend around the old meal program said that the meal program wasn't something you have to do, it's something you get to do. And I think the St. Vincent de Paul is in that same ilk, and that's why we've been such complementary organizations over the years, because I think we believe in those same things. Yeah. Oh, there's lots of big stuff. I mean, but not so big that you would stop so much to think about it. I mean, things like the food pantry. When the food pantry went to being a customer choice food pantry, and I know that's developed more, but that was like revolutionary. That was like, oh, you can do it differently. You know, don't you have to do it this way? You know, I remember the food pantry that Ralph used to do when he was the manager. It made you look the other way. They had this cart with wheels that would make a whole lot of noise, and when somebody came into the store and needed food, they would announce it over the overhead, because and then Ralph would make all kinds of noise to go get whatever it was, and all kinds of noise coming back. He didn't necessarily want to stay with that whole system, nor did anybody else, and so the organization developed. I mean, when you kind of say not good enough, that's a big day. You know, and when it also, you know, goes to a customer choice, you know, the food pantry moved to the corner both because of space, but also because of, you know, a desire to give people more dignity. So it went to occupy the space that the print shop used to occupy, and Alice ran the food pantry there, and joined by Chris later. And all the way along, those are all big days, you know. And when this space was born, I mean, I also remember most of the time it was being in some sort of tavern or some sort of a restaurant over a hamburger or whatever else. But I remember being with Ralph when I heard him say, "I wonder how small a formulary you can have and have a pharmacy." And I thought, boy, that's an odd question. How small? In other words, what he was saying was, we're faced with this issue. We want to help people. We want to help people in the right way. Here's the way that would help people more, but also be cost effective for us, so it's a twofer. And can we have a pharmacy and only dispense 4 or 5 drugs or whatever the number was? And it's sort of a reverse question. It's like, oh, because then we can develop this thing and we can get a license and that was a big day too, talking about getting truckloads of carrots dropped off on a loading dock. Those are all in the ways of development. And we're going forward in a way to ask those questions about Seton House and the port program and all those sorts of things, as well as the food pantry and food security issues. Just what's the next thing that where we can find the next twofers, that are going to be better for the whole fabric of Madison, better for the St. Vincent de Paul, but better for our customer members as well, and make that all easier and better and less traumatic. And so it's there's a lot of big days. I think the first meaningful thing I ever learned getting into all this, because I think when Ralph and I were pretty young men. It's scary when we think back on it, and it has happened when I've been talking with him, and he wonders whether over time somebody could handle a certain challenge. Sort of like, are they old enough or more or experienced enough? You have to point out and say, you remember how young we were? Why did anybody trust us at all? And help to understand some of the times when we got a little pushback because people said, geez, that's an awful lot to bite off. But there was a Capuchin priest, his name is Steve Glico in Milwaukee, who I would go visit with. He was the director of the meal program at St. Benedict the Moor between 9th and 10th in State and Highland in Milwaukee. And I would go there quite often. And first time I met with him, and we were walking around drinking a coffee, and he said, well, he would ask me what our vision was, what my vision was. What is he talking about? And you keep looking for a burning bush someplace, and over time he would say, you have to have a vision and you have to stick to it. And that was the most important thing that I think I learned. It's like that old book, the most important things I learned in kindergarten. That was like on the first day, that was like, and for me, most of the things that I've been involved with revolved around community building and hospitality, and community building as a function of faith. And which is different than evangelization. They're not at all the same. And I think that vision may get tweaked a little bit, but I think the most important thing to think about, and the thing that I would tell most people, is you have to kind of continue to go to ground. You have to know where you are and what you're about. And if somebody comes and says, but if we change this whole thing, we could get this much more money or that much more this or that. I said, yeah, that's true, but then are you going to kind of sort of start over and say that's what you're about now, which is okay, but it's not a belt and suspenders kind of thing. It's and so for me, I guess the thing that would be good going forward, as much as it has been in the past, is just to have that vision, to reflect on that vision, and see where it honestly is calling you today, so that you can stick to it. The St. Vincent de Paul is by this community is revered, and with that comes some responsibilities. Since it's one of those things that is so critical in people's lives when they need it, that little part that I don't always realize how good I have it. Since people it's important to be there when you need it. I think it's important for us to realize how people think about it, and especially people that are our customers. And at least for my part, I need to try every day to treat it like that. Treat this organization with the respect. At one point in time in life, when we started the meal program, I had to do things like 10 bar and stuff like that at night, and in order to keep body and soul together, so that I could do the meal program during the day. And then after John died, a year or so after John died, a guy named Gary McGoy, who was the first paid director, if I can characterize him like that, hired me to work nights. And so I worked nights at the port for a lot of years. I used to work from 7 to 2. So I'd work at the meal program till about 6:45, and then work at the port from 7 to 2. But at that point in time, the port literally helped me keep body and soul together. And over time, it's important to kind of return the favor, but to realize over all the people that I've met and all the people that I've been graced to encounter, that they're all pulling the rope in a certain way, and that that the St. Vincent de Paul is to be cherished for how people need it and how people think about it. That when you're on this end of things, you kind of are the keeper of the keys, and that's sort of how I think about it.